Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling, well, one of those famous stories in history, the Nativity.
Right.
And we're going to challenge the image that probably pops into your head automatically.
That classic Christmas card scene?
Exactly. You're picturing a cold wooden stable, right?
Or
Maybe a cool innkeeper. Well, what the sources in the archaeology show us is something very, very different from that tradition.
that's our goal today. We're going to move past those, artistic assumptions. We'll be looking at the original Greek texts, archaeological finds, everything we can to unpack what was really going on with the inn and the stable.
And this is where you get a real aha moment. Because the scene shifts from one of lonely rejection to, well, one of being completely overwhelmed by family, by crowding. Okay, let's unpack this.
And we want to show you that the idea of Jesus being born alone out in some public barn, it's just historically unlikely. The reality is actually much more intimate and a lot warmer.
So, to set the stage, let's start with the biggest historical puzzle piece we get from the sources.
The Roman census.
The Roman census. Luke's gospel says this is why Joseph and Mary had to travel from Nazareth all the way to Bethlehem. But why? Why did they have to travel at all?
And this is where scholars immediately run into a problem, a big one.
Okay.
Just think about the practicality of it. An empire-wide census where everyone has to travel back to their ancestral home.
It sounds like chaos. The entire economy would just stop.
It would be an administrative nightmare. And it's not how the Romans worked. Roman censuses were for taxation, and they were almost always conducted in place.
So if you lived in Nazareth, you got counted in Nazareth. Simple.
Exactly. Rome was all about efficiency. They wouldn't create that kind of chaos on purpose.
So the story already has a historical snag.
A huge one. And it gets worse because the specific census Luke mentions is usually identified as the one run by Quirinius in Judea.
And we have a date for that one, right?
We do, around 6 CE.
Okay, and here's the conflict that historians really get stuck on.
This is the kicker. The whole story of the birth, especially the visit from the Magi and King Herod's reaction, it all depends on Herod being alive.
But King Herod the Great died in 4 BCE.
Precisely. So you have the census that supposedly caused the trip happening years after a key figure in the story was already dead. The timeline just doesn't add up.
It's a fundamental contradiction in the sources.
It is. Now, scholars have a few ways of looking at this. One is that Luke wasn't writing a strict modern history. He was simplifying, maybe combining several local registrations into one single clean narrative event.
So kind of a literary device to get the family to Bethlehem for theological reasons.
That's one interpretation. Another view is that the trip wasn't about a universal Roman decree at all.
Then what was it about?
Well, Joseph was a descendant of David. It's very possible he still had family ties or even property back in Bethlehem. He might have been traveling for a local land registration or some other family obligation.
So it's not some huge imperial order, but a personal, maybe even a legal reason.
Exactly. It makes the journey more personal and, frankly, more plausible than an empire-wide shutdown.
Okay, that reframes the why of the journey. So now let's get to the central mystery, where they stayed. And this is where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the inn.
This one word is the source of, centuries of misunderstanding.
The traditional view is clear. They get to town, knock on the door of the local Holiday Inn, and the grumpy guy at the front desk says, no room.
Right, a public commercial hotel. But the language, the culture, the archaeology, none of it supports that.
So what's the evidence?
It comes down to one Greek word. In Luke 2.7, the word translated as inn is Katalyma.
Katalyma. And what does that actually mean?
It just means guest room or lodging. It's a general term. Crucially, there's a different Greek word, pandotion, which means a public inn or a commercial hotel.
And Luke uses that other word elsewhere, doesn't he?
He does. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, he uses pandotion, so he knew the difference. The fact he chose Katalyma here is a huge clue.
So if they were going to Joseph's ancestral hometown, they wouldn't be looking for a hotel. They'd be staying with family.
Absolutely. Hospitality in that culture was a sacred duty. Turning away your relatives, especially a pregnant woman about to give birth, it would have been a massive social shame. Unthinkable.
But hold on. If that's true, why weren't they given the best room? It still sounds like they got the short end of the stick, even from family.
That's a great question. And it's not about being uncharitable. It was about being full. You have to picture a typical first-century Bethlehem house.
What did that look like?
These were small, maybe 1 or 2 rooms, built for an extended family, and they generally had 2 main areas or levels.
Okay.
The upper level, sometimes a room built on the roof or just an elevated space, was the Katalyma.
Ah, the guest room.
Exactly. That was the designated space for visitors, the best spot in the house. So when Joseph and Mary arrived, that room was already full.
Full of other relatives, probably there for the same registration or family event.
Absolutely. The house was just overflowing.
So with the guest room full, where do they go?
Down to the main living area, the ground floor. This was the family room, kitchen, dining room, all in one. It's where everyone cooked, ate, and, lived.
And this is where the animals come into the picture, isn't it?
Yes. This is the most important detail. For warmth and for security, the family's animals, a donkey, maybe a few sheep, were brought inside at night, into that same main room.
So it's not a separate stable out back.
Not at all. It's a noisy, crowded, probably smelly, but warm room filled with aunts, uncles, cousins, kids, and livestock.
That completely changes the mental picture. Jesus was born in the middle of a family gathering.
In the middle of the family's living room, because the guest room was occupied, it wasn't rejection, it was just an overflow problem.
And the manger, what was that?
We picture this wooden cradle full of hay.
Right.
But in that kind of house, the manger was often a stone trough, sometimes carved right into the floor or part of a low wall that separated the family's sleeping area from where the animals were.
So it was a permanent part of the room's architecture.
Exactly. It was right there. A convenient, safe place to lay a newborn in a very, very crowded room. It's a practical.
That is a massive shift in perspective. Okay, let's pivot to another common misconception. The timing of the Magi, the wise men.
Ah, yes. Another creation of tradition.
Every nativity scene has them there, right next to the shepherds, all arriving on the same night.
And the texts just don't support that at all. You have to look at the 2 different gospel accounts.
That's the key clue in the sources.
It's the setting. Luke says the shepherds found Jesus lying in the manger. That tells us it was right after the birth, when they were still in that crowded ground floor living space.
Right.
But Matthew, when he describes the Magi's arrival, says they found the family in a house.
A house, not a manger.
That one-word difference is huge. It implies time has passed. The family has moved out of that temporary overflow situation and settled into a more stable residence.
And you have to consider who the Magi were and how far they traveled.
Right. These were likely astronomers, probably from Persia, modern-day Iran. That's a long, long journey. We're talking months at least.
And there's one piece of evidence from the story itself that pretty much confirms it wasn't right after the birth. It's what Herod does.
Absolutely. This is the clincher. After the Magi leave, Herod issues that horrifying order.
To kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem.
Yes, but look at the age range. He orders the killing of all boys 2 years old and under.
He wasn't just targeting newborns. He gave himself a 2-year window.
Exactly. Why 2 years? Because that's what he learned from the Magi about when the star first appeared. It strongly suggests their visit happened a long time after the birth. Maybe a year, maybe even close to 2.
So the shepherd's visit was one event, right at the beginning.
An immediate local event.
And the Magi's visit was a completely separate thing, maybe a year or more later, which then triggered the flight to Egypt.
The timeline is totally different from the tradition. They are 2 distinct stories, separated by a significant amount of time.
So to recap the big aha moment here for you, this deep dive really shifts the whole scene. We move away from a cold, lonely stable and a mean innkeeper.
And we move into a crowded, warm, noisy relative's house.
The birth of Jesus wasn't an act of rejection, but an inconvenience born out of family obligation and ancient hospitality. It was an indoor family event.
So what does all this mean? It just shows how vital it is to understand the first century context. When you strip away the layers of tradition, you get a much more vivid and I think much more human picture of what actually happened.
It makes this story feel so much more grounded.
It really is.
And finally, a provocative thought to leave you with. Considering that the Magi's delayed visit was the trigger for Herod's violence and the family's escape to Egypt, how does understanding that passage of time, that quiet gap of maybe a year or more between the birth and the escape change, how you view the early life, the safety, and maybe the vulnerability of that family in those intervening months?